The highway stretched endlessly ahead, its dark asphalt barely illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. Valeria Monroe shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat, one hand resting on her swollen belly while the other gripped the armrest. At 8 months pregnant, every bump in the road sent discomfort through her body, but she stayed silent. The atmosphere in the car was already heavy enough. Beside her, Jonathan Calloway, her husband, the man she had once believed would be her partner through everything, kept his gaze fixed on the road, his fingers tapping impatiently against the steering wheel. He hadn't said a word in over 2 hours. Something wasn't right. "John," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can we stop for a minute? I need to use the restroom." His grip on the wheel tightened, his expression hardening. "Can't you wait?" She swallowed her frustration. "I've been holding it for an hour, please." Without responding, Jonathan yanked the car toward the next exit, pulling into a small, nearly deserted gas station. The harsh glare of a flickering streetlight cast eerie shadows across the pavement. Valeria exhaled. Relief. "I'll be quick," she assured him, reaching for the door handle. Jonathan didn't acknowledge her. For a moment she hesitated, glancing at him. His jaw was set, his expression unreadable. A small, nagging voice inside her whispered that something was off. But she was too exhausted to listen. She stepped out of the car, carefully making her way toward the restroom. Inside, the dim fluorescent light buzzed above her, casting a pale glow over the cracked mirror. She turned on the faucet, splashing cool water on her face. Looking up, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Tired, drained, and alone. "Just a little longer," she whispered to herself. "Soon, we'll be home. Soon, everything will be okay." Taking a deep breath, she dried her hands and stepped outside. And stopped cold. The parking spot where Jonathan had been was empty. The air rushed from her lungs as her eyes darted frantically around the lot. "John?" she called, her voice shaky. Silence. Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed his number. 1 ring, 2 rings. Then, a text notification. Her stomach dropped as she opened it. "This is over. Take care of yourself." Valeria's breath hitched. Her grip on the phone tightened, her pulse roaring in her ears. No, this couldn't be happening. She called him again, straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Her vision blurred as realization crashed over her. Jonathan hadn't forgotten her. He had left her, on purpose, in the middle of nowhere. Panic clawed at her throat, but before she could process the betrayal, her phone vibrated again. A new message, not from Jonathan, from an unknown number. With a deep sense of dread, she opened it. A photo. Her blood ran cold. There he was, Jonathan, sitting in a private beachside lounge, a drink in hand, his arm draped around another woman. Lauren, the same woman Valeria had suspected for months. The same woman Jonathan had laughed off as just a friend. And now, while she stood alone at a rundown gas station, heavily pregnant and abandoned, he was celebrating. The cold night air pressed against her skin, but no chill could match the icy realization settling in her chest. Jonathan Calloway was never coming back. The world tilted beneath Valeria, her legs growing weak as she clutched her phone. The image on the screen, Jonathan laughing, drinking, celebrating, burned into her mind. He had left her. The father of her child had abandoned her at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. And he wasn't coming back. The neon gas station sign flickered above her, the hum of electricity the only sound cutting through the vast silence of the night. A cold wind lashed against her skin, but the chill inside her was worse. Her breath hitched, uneven and sharp, as she tried to force her brain to work through the rising panic. "Think, Valeria. Think." Her fingers trembled as she reached into her coat pocket, searching for her wallet. Nothing. A fresh wave of dread washed over her. Jonathan had taken everything, her wallet, her credit cards, even her ID. She was alone. The gas station door was locked, the closed sign blinking mockingly at her. She turned toward the road, scanning the darkness for headlights. Nothing. Just an endless stretch of empty highway swallowed by the night. Then, a raindrop. Then another. Within seconds, the sky opened up, unleashing a relentless downpour. The icy rain soaked through her coat, chilling her to the bone as she pulled the fabric tighter around herself. Her boots splashed against the pavement as she forced herself to move, to do something, anything, other than stand there drowning in helplessness. But with every step her body felt heavier, the exhaustion, the heartbreak, the sheer weight of betrayal pressing down on her like an invisible force. And then, pain. A sharp, white-hot pain shot through her abdomen. Valeria gasped, doubling over, clutching her stomach. No, not now. Her breath came in shallow, ragged pants, her pulse roaring in her ears. Another contraction. Stronger this time. She barely had time to process it before her legs gave out, her body slamming against a streetlight for support. The world blurred. Her vision darkened at the edges. She needed help. Now. But there was no one. No voices, no passing cars, just the rain, the wind, the sound of her own labored breathing. Valeria was going to collapse, right here on the cold pavement. Her child, her baby, was in danger, and she could do nothing. Just as her knees buckled, a pair of headlights sliced through the night. A car. She tried to lift her hand, to wave, to scream, but her strength was fading. The vehicle slowed. Then, the engine cut off. The driver's door swung open. A tall figure stepped out, an umbrella shielding him from the rain. He moved toward her, his pace urgent, concern written across his face. "Miss, are you okay?" Valeria blinked through the rain, barely making out his features. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Another contraction ripped through her and her body gave in. She collapsed forward. Strong arms caught her. Just before the darkness swallowed her whole, she heard his voice, low, steady, urgent. "I've got you." Everything blurred. The storm, the pain, the fear, it all faded. She barely registered the sensation of being lifted. Warmth. A car door opening. The scent of leather seats and clean linen. The rumble of an engine coming to life. She was moving, and then nothing. Valeria drifted toward consciousness, her mind slowly piecing together the fragments of her reality. The first thing she registered was the harsh fluorescent light overhead, too bright against her tired eyes. Then came the sterile scent of antiseptic, sharp and clinical. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor echoed softly in the background. A hospital. Panic surged through her, an instinctual fear snapping her fully awake. Her baby. She gasped, trying to push herself up, but a firm yet gentle hand pressed against her shoulder, urging her to stay down. "Easy," a voice said, calm and reassuring. "You're safe." Valeria's vision cleared, and she found herself looking into the face of a man she had never seen before. He wasn't Ryan, he wasn't anyone familiar, but there was something about him. A steadiness, a quiet strength, that made her pause. Tall, with dark, slightly tousled hair, and eyes filled with something she hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine concern. "Where?" Her throat was dry, her voice barely above a whisper. "County Hospital," the man answered, adjusting the blanket over her carefully. "You collapsed from exhaustion and stress, but your baby is fine." Valeria blinked at him, trying to absorb his words. Her baby was safe. Relief flooded through her so intensely that she nearly broke apart, and then it all came rushing back. Ryan, the gas station, the text message. The photo of him at a beach resort with Vanessa. A sharp pain twisted in her chest, but before she could let it consume her, the man spoke again. "I found you on the side of the road. You were barely conscious. I had to get you here fast." His voice was calm, but there was an edge of undeniable concern beneath it. Valeria swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the blanket. You saved me." A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "I guess you could say that." She stared at him, struggling to process it all. Why would a stranger stop? Why would he care? "Who are you?" she asked hesitantly. "Daniel Carter," he answered simply. "Doctor." Valeria's breath hitched. A doctor. Of all the people who could have found her in the middle of that storm, fate had sent someone whose entire life was dedicated to saving others. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting slightly. "Valeria, I need to ask you something." Her gaze flickered to him. "The hospital ran a check on your ID while you were unconscious," he continued, as if anticipating her question, "and I noticed something strange." Her body tensed. "You didn't list an emergency contact. No one to call." He tilted his head slightly, studying her carefully. "Where is your husband?" The words felt like a punch to the gut. She could lie. She could say that Ryan was on a business trip, that he would be there soon. But looking at Daniel, this man who had saved her life, who had done nothing but treat her with kindness, she knew she couldn't. Her lips trembled. He left me. Daniel's jaw tightened. His entire demeanor shifted. What do you mean he left you? His voice was softer now, but beneath it was something dangerous. Valeria inhaled shakily, staring down at her hands as if the answers were written in the lines of her palms. We were on a road trip. He pulled into a gas station, told me to go inside, and when I came out, he was gone. A heavy silence filled the space between them. Daniel's expression darkened. You're 8 months pregnant. She let out a hollow, bitter laugh. Trust me, I know. Another pause. Then Daniel ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head in pure disbelief. Where is he now? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. Valeria's stomach twisted. At a beach resort, with his mistress. She hated how broken the words sounded coming out of her mouth, how they burned like acid against her tongue. For a moment, Daniel didn't move. Then, his entire body went rigid. He didn't speak, didn't blink, and then quietly, through clenched teeth, that bastard. The sheer disgust in his voice startled her. Not pity, not empty sympathy, rage for her. Valeria blinked, thrown off by the way her chest tightened. Not with sadness, but with something else. Something she hadn't felt in a very, very long time. A sense of being protected. Daniel let out a slow, measured breath, clearly forcing himself to calm down. Then he leaned forward, his gaze locked onto hers. Look, he said, his voice steady again, but still firm. You don't have to tell me everything, but I need you to know something. Valeria swallowed. You're not alone. Her breath hitched. I'm not? Daniel held her gaze, his expression unshakable. No, he said. You have nowhere to go, but you're not alone. Not anymore. For the first time since Ryan had left her at that gas station, Valeria believed it. The room was quiet, except for the steady ticking of a clock. Valeria sat up slowly, pressing a hand to her belly as she watched Daniel carefully. His eyes, sharp yet filled with something undeniably kind, never wavered as he spoke. You have nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and I can't, in good conscience, let you walk out of here without a plan. She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. Why are you doing this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel didn't hesitate. Because someone should have done it for you a long time ago. A lump formed in Valeria's throat. No one had ever said that to her before. For years, she had convinced herself that she was alone, that no one would ever stand beside her, that no one would ever choose her. But this man, a complete stranger, had stopped for her in the rain, had carried her to safety, had promised she wasn't alone. And for the first time in years, hope stirred inside her. The days blurred together after she was discharged. Her body was still weak, her movements slow, but she was no longer facing this alone. Valeria had expected Daniel to drop her off at a shelter, maybe a small motel. Instead, you'll stay with me until we figure something out, he had said simply. She had been too exhausted to argue, and that was how she found herself standing in Daniel Carter's home. His house was nothing like the cold, sterile mansion she had shared with Ryan. It was warm, filled with books stacked haphazardly on shelves, soft blankets thrown over the couch, and the lingering scent of freshly brewed coffee. For the first time in years, Valeria felt safe. Daniel had set up a guest room for her, making sure she had everything she needed. Extra pillows to ease her aching back, warm socks, and even a stack of baby books. Just in case you get bored, he had joked. But it wasn't the books that made her chest tighten. It was the fact that someone had thought about her comfort. Daniel drove her to every prenatal checkup, making sure she got there safely. He never hovered, never pushed for details about her past. But his presence was steady, reliable, like an anchor keeping her from drifting away. Still, the ghosts of the past were hard to shake. There were nights when Valeria woke up gasping, her body covered in cold sweat, Ryan's betrayal replaying in her mind. She would sit on the edge of the bed, her hand resting on her belly, whispering soft reassurances to her child. We're okay now, she murmured in the darkness. We'll be okay. And in the quiet of the house, she would hear Daniel moving around. Sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes pacing the hall. As if he knew she needed to hear another person breathing nearby. She never asked if he stayed awake on purpose, and he never mentioned it. One morning, Valeria sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steaming cup of tea Daniel had made for her. She had spent so many years being defined by Ryan, by his power, his cruelty, his control. She had been his wife, his possession, his afterthought. But now she had nothing to her name, and maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. She had a blank slate, a chance to be someone new. Valeria lifted her chin, determination flickering in her eyes. "I want to get a job," she said firmly. Daniel looked up from the medical journal he had been reading. He studied her for a long moment. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I can't sit here feeling sorry for myself. I need to stand on my own 2 feet." A small smile tugged at his lips. There was something like admiration in his gaze. "All right," he said. "Let's find you something." And just like that, Valeria Montenegro stopped being a woman defined by her past and started becoming the woman who controlled her own future. The ocean waves crashed against the shore, the golden sun casting its glow over the luxurious private beach resort. Ryan leaned back in his private cabana, a cocktail in hand, his expensive sunglasses shielding his eyes from the afternoon glare. Across from him, Vanessa, his mistress, giggled as she scrolled through her phone. "You're so much better off without her," she purred, reaching over to trail her fingers down his arm. Ryan smirked. "Of course I am," he said smoothly, taking a slow sip of his drink. Valeria was a burden, weak, fragile. He trailed off, his words carried away by the sound of the waves. Far away from him, in a warm, quiet home, Valeria was learning to rebuild herself. She was learning to stand. She was learning to fight. And soon, Ryan Sterling would realize just how big of a mistake he had made. Ryan leaned back in his private cabana, sipping his expensive cocktail, basking in the illusion of his newfound freedom. No responsibilities, no pregnant wife to weigh him down, no crying baby to disrupt his life. Just the sun, the ocean, and Vanessa, the woman who actually knew how to have fun. "To a new beginning," Vanessa purred, clinking her glass against his. Ryan smirked, utterly unbothered. Claire was gone. Out of sight, out of mind. He had washed his hands of her and the child she carried. Let her figure it out on her own. But while Ryan Sterling was indulging in his false sense of security, the rest of the world was burning. It started with a leaked security camera video. The footage wasn't long, nor was it high quality, but it was damning. A gas station parking lot, late at night. The timestamp marked the exact moment. Claire stepping out of a sleek black car. Seconds later, the car peeled away, leaving her stranded. 8 months pregnant, alone, confused. Within hours, the video went viral. How could someone do this? She was carrying his child, and he abandoned her like garbage. Ryan Sterling is a monster. Public outrage spread like wildfire. Investigative reporters dug deeper, uncovering the ugly truth. His infidelity, his lavish vacation with Vanessa just days after abandoning Claire, the cold, calculated betrayal. Within 24 hours, hashtags like Justice for Claire and #Boycott Sterling Corp were trending worldwide. But it didn't stop at just social media outrage. Sterling Enterprises, one of the most powerful investment firms in the country, depended on public image and investor trust. And now, both were crumbling. Major clients pulled out. Stock prices plummeted. High-profile partners distanced themselves. A formal investigation into Ryan's unethical conduct began. The final blow came when the board of directors called an emergency meeting. They had a single agenda: should Ryan Sterling be removed from his own company? And just when Ryan thought things couldn't possibly get worse, Vanessa turned on him. Vanessa had been with Ryan for the luxury, the power, the money. But now, Ryan was damaged goods. And Vanessa Jacobs had no interest in going down with a sinking ship. So she emptied the credit card he had given her, packed her designer bags, and disappeared without a trace. The only thing she left behind was a note on the hotel nightstand. "Oops, looks like you lost everything. Guess I'll take my leave now. Have fun cleaning up your mess." And just like that, Ryan Sterling, once a man who had everything, was now a man who had nothing. The worst part? Claire hadn't lifted a single finger to destroy him. He had done it all by himself. The knock on the door came late in the evening. Claire had just finished folding tiny baby clothes. Soft pastels, gentle fabrics, each one a promise of the new life she was about to welcome. She felt lighter than she had in months. Her belly was rounder now, her due date fast approaching, but for the first time in a long time she wasn't afraid. She was Ready. Then, knock, knock, knock. Her hands froze on a tiny onesie. Something about the sound felt wrong. Daniel wasn't supposed to be back yet. No one else ever came by unannounced. Slowly, her heart pounding, she moved to the door. She opened it, and there he was. Ryan Sterling. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she simply stared. The man who had abandoned her. The man who had left her to suffer. The man who had once been everything to her and now meant nothing at all. Ryan Sterling stood on her doorstep, looking nothing like the man she had once known. Gone was the polished, arrogant businessman. His once perfect suit was now wrinkled, his sharp jaw shadowed with stubble, and the piercing confidence in his eyes had been replaced with something Claire never thought she'd see in him. Desperation. "Claire," his voice was hoarse, almost pleading. She said nothing, gripping the edge of the door as she fought the overwhelming urge to slam it in his face. But Ryan, ever the opportunist, took her silence as an invitation to step forward. "Please," he continued, voice cracking. I just want to talk." Claire lifted her chin, keeping her voice cold, steady, unshakable. "Why?" Ryan exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his disheveled hair. "I made a mistake," he admitted, jaw clenching. "I should have never left you." Her fingers tightened on the doorframe. "And yet you did." His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I wasn't thinking straight, Claire. I was stupid, selfish. I don't know what got into me." A humorless laugh escaped her lips. "I do." Ryan's brows furrowed. "What?" She stepped forward slightly, her voice like ice cutting through the air. "You thought I was weak." He flinched. "You thought I had nowhere to go, that I would fall apart without you, that I'd come crawling back begging for you to take me in." Her lips curled, not into a smile but something far sharper. "Guess what, Ryan?" She lifted a hand to her swollen belly, her voice steady, powerful. "I survived." Ryan's eyes flickered down to her stomach, realization hitting him like a blow. She didn't need him. Not now. Not ever again. His face twisted with emotion and he scrambled for words. "Claire, please, I lost everything. Vanessa left the moment things got bad. My company, gone. My reputation, destroyed." He took a step closer, reaching out. "You were always the best thing in my life, and I was too blind to see it. But now," Claire pulled back before he could touch her, her stomach twisting, not with sadness, not with longing, but with disgust. He wasn't here because he loved her. He was here because he had no one else, and she refused to be his second choice. She took a deep breath, locking eyes with him one final time. "You're not sorry you left me," she said, her voice calm. "You're sorry that I moved on without you." Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came. Because he knew she was right. She stepped back, her grip tightening on the doorknob. "You don't get to come back now, Ryan. Not after everything." For a moment he just stood there, his world crumbling around him. But she didn't hate him. She didn't even pity him. Her expression was something far worse. Indifference. "I found happiness without you," she said simply. "And I don't need you anymore." Then, without another word, she closed the door in his face. And this time, it was Ryan Sterling who was left standing in the cold. The hospital was quiet, the rhythmic beeping of the monitors blending with the soft murmur of nurses outside the door. Claire lay in the bed, her body exhausted but her heart full in a way she had never known before. In her arms, wrapped in a soft white blanket, was her newborn son. Tiny, perfect, hers. Tears welled in her eyes as she traced her finger along his delicate cheek. "We did it, baby," she whispered, voice trembling. "We made it." Across the room, Daniel sat quietly, watching the two of them with something close to awe. He had been there through it all, holding her hand when the contractions became unbearable, whispering reassurances when she swore she couldn't push any longer, making sure the doctors treated her with the care and dignity she deserved. And now, he was still here, even though she wouldn't have blamed him if he had left after making sure she was safe. But he hadn't. And something about that made her chest ache in the best possible way. Daniel stood, walking toward her carefully, as if afraid of disturbing the moment. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. Claire looked up at him, then back down at her son, and for the first time in a long, long time she smiled. The golden morning light filtered through the windows, wrapping the small living room in warmth. Claire sat on the couch, gently rocking her newborn son, marveling at the tiny fingers that reached for her. His soft brown eyes were filled with trust, innocence, a new beginning. And beside her, watching over them with quiet devotion, was Daniel. For the first time in years, Claire felt free. After leaving the hospital, she had expected to feel lost. No money, no job, no real plan, just a newborn in her arms and a heart that was still learning how to heal. But Daniel had been there. "Stay as long as you need," he had told her without hesitation. At first, she resisted. She wasn't used to relying on anyone. But Daniel never treated her like a burden. Instead, he treated her like someone worth staying for. While Claire was rebuilding her life, Ryan was watching his crumble. The scandal had ruined him. No company, no money, no reputation left to protect. He tried to rebuild, desperate for a second chance, but no one wanted to do business with a man who had abandoned his pregnant wife. Even his so-called friends had disappeared. They had no use for him anymore. And Vanessa? She had moved on to the next rich man without so much as a goodbye. Ryan was truly alone. No amount of alcohol, no string of meaningless flings could drown the guilt that haunted him every night. And the worst part? The image he couldn't escape, the moment Claire had looked at him for the last time. Not with anger, not with sadness, with nothing. Because he didn't matter to her anymore, and never would again. But Claire? She wasn't wasting her time thinking about Ryan anymore. She had better things to focus on. Like the small business she had started, designing custom baby clothes, something that blended her love for fashion with her new life as a mother. And Daniel, he was still by her side. Never pushing, never expecting, just being there. One evening, as they sat on the back porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon, Claire turned to him. "Daniel," she murmured. He glanced at her, setting down his cup of tea. The warm evening breeze carried the soft scent of blooming flowers as Claire sat beside Daniel, the fading sun painting the sky in hues of gold and violet. She held her cup of tea, feeling its warmth seep into her fingers, grounding her in a moment that, months ago, she never would have believed possible. "Daniel," she murmured, hesitating for a brief moment before turning to him with a small smile. "Thank you for everything." He held her gaze, his expression unreadable at first, then softening into something filled with quiet understanding. "You don't have to thank me, Claire." She shook her head. "I do, because for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm just surviving. I feel like I'm actually living." A slow, knowing smile tugged at the corner of Daniel's lips. He reached for her hand, his touch steady and sure, as if he had always known she would find her way. "That's all I ever wanted for you," he said simply. And in that moment, Claire knew. She wasn't just someone's wife anymore. She wasn't a woman who had been left behind, discarded, or broken beyond repair. She was strong. She was independent. She was loved. She was herself. She had thought happiness was something given, something dependent on someone else's love, approval, or validation. But she had been wrong. Happiness wasn't given, it was created. And she had created hers. As Claire stood in the doorway of their home, her newborn son nestled safely in her arms, Daniel beside her, she looked out at the road ahead, not with fear, not with regret, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that had shaped her, for the love that had saved her, for the life she had built, on her own terms. The wind brushed gently against her skin, the future stretching out before her like an open horizon, full of possibilities. And as she smiled, she knew one truth with absolute certainty. Strength isn't about where you come from, it's about how you rise after being broken. Claire had been abandoned, betrayed, underestimated, but in the end, she had found love. She had found purpose, she had found happiness. Not because someone gave it to her, but because she chose it for herself. Years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Claire stood outside her boutique adjusting the display in the window. The sign above the door read, "Little Wonders," her own business, a children's clothing store born from the dreams she once thought impossible. Inside, her son, now a bright and curious little boy, laughed as he helped Daniel organize new inventory. Daniel, ever patient, ruffled the boy's hair, casting a quick glance at Claire through the glass. Their eyes met, and he smiled. The same steady, knowing smile that had been her anchor since the night he found her in the rain. Claire took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. She had been lost once, she had been abandoned, but now she was home. And this was just the beginning. The past no longer defined her. The future was hers to create.